Hello, and welcome to the first ever installment of Holler Hogwash. Now, if you tuned into the podcast Love Brought You Here, you might be a little like, what is going on? And the answer is this is my side quest. This is the Love Brought You Here podcast, and I am Cassandra, your host. But we're going to take a little detour this week because I am still working on getting guests booked. I actually just gained access to a proper podcasting studio, which is very exciting. But all of these things take time. And yes, maybe I jumped the gun on putting the podcast out there, but I'm very lazy sometimes. And so I just need to get momentum going. So welcome to my side quest where I take things that actually happened to me. Most of the stories of the things that happened to me sound unbelievable already. So I thought, what the heck? I'm going to take them, I'm going to make them a little more over the top, and I'm going to tell these stories to you through the style of Appalachian storytelling and folklore. So maybe you'll like it, maybe you won't. I don't really care because I'm having a great time writing it. If you'd like to stick around afterwards, I will provide you with an actual behavioral science analysis about why this is an effective thing to do and how this ties into the theme of Love Brought You Here and choosing joy and self-love through the creatively rebellious process. So stick around. I don't really care. It doesn't matter, but I will have a scientific explanation. But first, before we get started, as always, a snack haul. And actually this snack pertains to the folklore that I'm about to tell you. It comes from that time period. This is apparently going to talk like a West Virginian while we do this. This is an endangered species chocolate bar. All right. So yeah, I was buying these circa when I was about 18 years old, and you had to go to a hippie store to get them. And this is the sea salt and almond 72% chocolate, dark chocolate. That's the snack today. So that's the snack haul for now. I mean, I guess I could ASMR. Isn't this like what people do these days? Oh, look. I don't really understand. There used to be little cards in these that gave you like an endangered animal species or whatever. And they still kind of do it. There's an owl information about this little owl guy. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe somebody's bought out the brand. I haven't really checked into it, but it's good, solid chocolate. So, all right. Now for the first installation, and this is going to be a shorter side quest. I promise. I know I said that last week's episode would be short and it wasn't. But this will be. So, the first installment of Holler Hogwash, or Holler Hogwash as we'd say in West Virginia, is entitled The Legend of the Bravest Fools. Come along with me. Deep in the shallow mountains of rural Appalachia is a hilly ridge known to be the driest ridge in all of the furthest away closest land. This area is said to attract rowdy youth aged 7 years 3 times over. That's 21 years old in case you can't math. I got you. This ridge can only be accessed by traversing a long, dark, very narrow tunnel, and only the locals know the secret code to exit it. They must honk like a goose thrice to access the opening to this spectacular ridge through the tunnel. But if they fail to do so, they will be met by a bright and blinding light that will illuminate every mistake that the young folks have ever made in their entire long, short lives. Local lore has it that these folks will hear the battle cry of their dance instructor / life coach of their entire collective generation, the entire generation, just before this illumination happens. And that is if the traveling youth fail to provide the secret code. It is said that the pitch black tunnel will drop a beat so intense it feels just like a heartbeat as the words, "Put my thing down, flip it, and reverse it," echo throughout the narrow canal. This is the moment of reckoning when the elderly youth understand. Shit, I didn't get the password right. But for those who are able to successfully traverse this birth canal-like experience and make it through to the coveted ridge, legend says that intoxicatingly effervescent bliss lies just beyond the opening of said tunnel. For less than centuries, and longer than decades even, those aged thrice 7 years have congregated in the area to celebrate. Celebrate what, you may ask? It doesn't really matter. Birthdays? Duh. Pregnancies? Some say why, some say why not. Important religious dates? Okay. Dinner? Come on over. Women harvesting grapes straight off the wild vines that grew them? Absolutely. Everything's a celebratory cause in the dry ridge. The only problem is that this very arid ridge, that some say is dry, is sometimes very cold and wet. So much so that it becomes very dangerous to drive one's covered wagon over the dry and wet mountain ridges that surround the area. If you ask any of the locals, they will tell you without hesitation that only the bravest of the brave have made it to the top of the mountain when the dry roads become wet from winter's stanky breath. The following is the legendary tale of 4 of the bravest and most chosen youth who dared to make this journey late one night, less than 30 years, but more than 2 decades ago. Some say the ridge's intoxication is what fueled their fearless passion, and some would say that they simply had rocks for brains. Either way, this particularly moist night on the ridge that was known to be so dry would go down in history. Okay, maybe history is like a strong word. Maybe it was more like journals, like somebody's journal, but anyway, that's beside the point. The youthful adults had braved an excursion, even though they had heard through the grapevine that the roads were about to start changing because the nearby forest witch had indigestion. And she had become so angry about her gaseous state that she sent frozen water to the area in an act of projection. But this couldn't stop the young fools. They knew that they had a very important mission and could not be deterred from completing it. They knew that they had to go out into the world and gather liquids to bring back to their dwelling place, nestled high up in the shallow, deep ridges. Now, since they didn't have any containers because they were young and irresponsible, they actually had to use their stomachs, of course, to hold the liquids until they got home. I mean, that seems pretty obvious, though. While out gathering these resources, the group realized that in their rush to gather liquids on their quest, they had forgotten to refuel their bodies. Now, that's just really fancy talk for they were freaking starving. So they stopped at an establishment that had a sign outside that said sustenance and rations, and they ate some food. But they were holding so many liquids in their bellies to bring back home with them, like responsible adults that they were, that their brains were actually floating around in their heads, and they didn't notice that the dry ridges had actually become saturated by the moist frozen water that was sent by the angry, bloated forest witch. One member of the group suggested that they hire someone to caulk their covered wagon to help them traverse the now very moist, dry roads. "Do you know how expensive that would be?" exclaimed one member of the group. To which the driver of the wagon immediately shot back, "Do you know how expensive a funeral is? And do you know how boring it is to sit up with the dead all night?" A round of saying touche over and over again broke out into the food establishment. But that fact was that actually no one even had the currency to pay anyone to caulk the wagon for them, so they actually had to proceed without help anyway. So, on to raw dogging the wet roads the group forewent. Bravely, of course. One member of the group was a young woman who was traveling through the area from the foreign land of DC, and she had laid down upon the lap of one of the other youth in the back seat of the covered wagon. She was crying hysterically because she had remembered something that was so sad that she thought her heart was broken forever and she was just completely doomed and wrecked and done. And as she continued sobbing, she told the group what it was, that it was a plastic G.I. Joe figurine that she had lost in the wagon on the floorboards when she'd tried to throw it at someone. And as she was sharing this about her heartbreak, the driver of the wagon began to lose control of the horses that were steering and pulling them up the shallow mountains. I need a drink. Hold, please. You see, the horses in the area weren't used to the ridges of the dry roads being wet, and as it happens, they were actually very afraid of water. Now, I know that mammals usually are only afraid of water if they're like rabid, if they have rabies, but trust me, that was not the case. These horses were actually just more of erratic bitch baby ponies than anything else. They had dressed up like horses so that they could get jobs pulling covered wagons, and they lied on their resumes. So really, they were scared of most things and they weren't really efficient at all, if I'm being completely honest, which I am for sure being like completely honest. So the driver began to panic and frantically started tossing the reins from side to side as she lost more and more control of the covered wagon. Just as the wagon narrowly missed the side of the mountain before it headed up the edge of the ridge, the sobbing girl from DC in the back seat sat straight up, almost as if she had been possessed by something that lived within the Appalachian mountains. She suddenly screamed, "Just keep up momentum!" And immediately she began wailing the words of her collective generation as if she were calling some sort of protection over the wagon itself. Father! 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 Father, into my hands I commend my spirit. Father, into my hands. Why have you forsaken me? In your eyes forsaken me. In your thoughts forsaken me. In your heart forsaken me. Oh. And with a mere blink of an eye, the group was suddenly returned to their safe dwelling spot, despite the fact that the wet, dry ridges on the road were still there. Although they never quite understood how they made it back to safety with their bellies still full of liquid rations that blustery night long ago, the group talked about this memory often and fondly. They never questioned the saving graces of the night, nor what seemed like some kind of song and mountain possession that also ended once, very abruptly, once the group made it back to safety. But recent, ancient legend has it that if you drive up that same ridge on a night that resembles the one of the incident, so think like snow, for example, is probably a good approximation. And if you're scared, and you sing the song that I just shared of the previous generations, a ghostly covered wagon will show up and for youth will offer to caulk your wagon for you and help take you to safety. And I know this to be true because one time I saw it happen in the future of the past, just down yonder, over there in the holler. And that is the first installment of my side quest, Holler Hogwash. I forgot the name of it for a second. I'm so excited to read the story. Now, again, that was called The Bravest of Fools. And I have a whole arsenal of these stories written about crazy things that just sound crazy, that happened to me in my life anyway. So why not make them a little more outlandish? Make them folklore. I mean, I'm a legend in my own mind, so who cares? But there is actually science, behavioral science, behind why this actually works. So there's actually a field of study called narrative therapy, which is basically storytelling. You write down a story. It helps your brain process the things that happen. I won't go into like the science of it all. In Appalachia, we are very fond of this, even though it's often not labeled as some sort of like psychological tool. but it's very effective. Also, for someone who's experienced extreme trauma, there is a modality of therapy called internal family systems. And in internal family systems, you look at the different parts of yourself. And those parts are the bits of the psyche that have broken off because of trauma. Like you get little cracks in your psyche when traumatic events happened. As I've said before, trauma disconnects the mind from the body. And often these little, even without something like dissociative identity disorder, which used to be known as multiple personalities, even outside of that, if you have complex PTSD or PTSD, that's your brain creating these almost, these different parts of you to protect you in some way. And so internal family systems takes a look at those different parts. So recently I was thinking about myself and those parts of me, and I was just I know that I struggle with creativity recently, and I thought, that hasn't always been the case. So I thought back to a time when I was a teenager, and there is a part of me that I would call exiled who experienced something traumatic, and she was a very creative piece of me. And she was a great writer and wrote stories just like this all the time. But at about 16 years old, while going through a traumatic life change that literally ruined her life, but I'm very proud of myself for enduring it, she was silenced. And I think I've kind of kept that part of myself very quiet. So this has actually been therapy for me. If you think about kids, and if you have ever seen a child in any kind of therapy, they play. The therapists play intentionally with the kids because kids, when they draw, whatever creative process they use, that actually helps them process the trauma that has happened to them through their brain. It's like the external, they're able to move it from inside their brain, where it will eat you alive if you don't get rid of it, into the world, into some sort of creative endeavor. And so by writing these stories, as ridiculous as they sound, and I really don't care because, like I said, I had a great time, it is me being able to play, me being able to use this rebellious creative endeavor, because most people won't take the time to write something like that. And for me, this is my creative medium. I'm a writer. I've always been a writer. I mean, I can write better than that, obviously. But the point being that everyone inside, like we've all gone through trauma. And going back to the title of this entire podcast, Love Brought You Here, James Baldwin is pushing the fact that love, and I'm saying self-love is included in this, is rebellious. It's disruptive. It disturbs the status quo. And so I'm disturbing my internal status quo and allowing this old version to come out and play. And I would encourage you to find a way to do the same for yourself. Maybe you don't write crazy stories like that, and that's okay. Also, just telling the story out loud, I had a blast doing it. But so if you listen to that story and you're like, oh my God, this is so disrespectful to James Baldwin, like, what is this girl doing? I mean, like, legit, because sometimes I just kind of walk around the world like that. Like, what am I doing? I don't care. But there is a point to it, and it does perfectly feed into this idea of choosing self-love through creative rebellion. Because you don't even, like, when I started writing it wasn't this story that was the first one that I wrote, but I just sat down and wrote it, and I thought, you know what? I was actually, at the time that this exiled part of me was writing stories, I was processing something that was very heavy that was happening. I had left the church. It was a cult. I had left it, and I was writing that to process it. So I would encourage you, what did you do when you were a kid? When you showed up in this world, you understood the damn assignment. Like, you came in, you knew what you wanted to do. What were you doing that you don't do anymore? You don't have to share it with everyone. Like, just let that version of yourself come out and play. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed my side quest, because there's probably going to be a few more of these while I take classes to get the studio and everything. And also I wanted to mention, I do have the progressive playlist on the Tube of You. The channel is Love Brought You Here podcast. Everything across social media is Love Brought You Here podcast. And so that progressive playlist this week, I am adding to the Snacks and Tracks playlist. Work It by Missy Elliott, obviously, because it was in the story, and Chop Suey by System of a Down, because obviously that was also in this. And those were things that I was listening to back in the day with this group of friends, because again, this was a real thing that happened. Perhaps it wasn't necessarily traumatic, but it was a traumatic time in my life. And as always, check out the Substack that's attached to this podcast for more information. I often give things that I've come across locally in my travels, because I've traveled all the way across the country when I was homeless. So I've come across a lot of cool things. I've seen a lot of cool things. I have a lot of inside information. And sometimes I'll share stories. I'll share biographies of guests when they're here. Just check it out. And like and subscribe if you enjoy this content. And hopefully I'll see you next week. If I don't, I hope you at least got a good laugh out of watching me. Thank you for tuning in to the Love Brought You Here podcast, and for listening to my shenanigans through my side quest, Holler Hogwash. Have a fantastic week, and I'll see you next Monday.